What's up, guys? Theo here, coming to you with a prediction for Bilder versus JeongYeong. So right now, Lee is a minus 140 favorite, and the comeback on Bilder is plus 110 on DraftKings. Guys, I like Bilder here, and I say that as someone who actually went into this matchup having seen Bilder's fights before, being familiar with the fact that I thought he was pretty overrated. And honestly, I was looking for something in Jong to show me that I would take a fade spot on Bilder here, because I was so confident before I saw these odds that Bilder was going to be the favorite. But to my surprise, he is somehow an underdog here. I think a lot of the lines on this fight are just on this card are just very skewed. Feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I like so many of these dogs, guys, but I promise I'm not just picking dogs for no reason. I feel like I have really strong arguments for most of the underdogs on this card, so I do think we're going to see a lot of upsets, especially on the undercard in this, and I'll explain why I think Bilder is going to be one of those. Basically, I am not a big fan of Bilder's style. I think that he kind of has trouble putting all of his skills together in the octagon. I have just a feeling in my gut that Bilder is one of these guys that looks like an absolute killer in the gym, but when he actually gets into the cage, it ends up not being as kind of refined as you expect it to be based on what you see from him, because he is very skilled in all areas and there is a lot of hype on his name. But I just feel like his output is not the best, and he did win a decision against Yong and lost against Kyle Nelson, which Kyle Nelson is a good fighter and a bit underrated, so nothing wrong with losing that fight there, but he did not have the best output. The issue is that with Jong, I think that he is going to kind of play right into Bilder's game in this fight, because what I saw from him when I kind of went back and taped his last fight in the UFC, which was it was the final fight of basically the Road to UFC tournament, where a lot of Asian fighters, Asian prospects were pitted against one another. And he ended up winning this tournament ultimately and defeating some guy with like one name, Yong or something like that, who had leopard print hair. But I really wasn't impressed with what I saw from Lee in that fight, and I actually think he probably lost that fight. I don't really know how they scored it for him, because he got pushed against the cage and wrestled the whole time. And while he did manage to neutralize some of what Yong was throwing at him, he looked pretty clumsy, man. He really did not. He looked like somebody who is still learning MMA, and he looked like somebody who has all the fundamentals down, but he's just about one step behind in terms of like putting everything together. One thing I do like about Lee is that he is quite composed and he takes a shot well. I like that about him. But I just think Bilder is going to be a little bit too much for him here, because even though Blake's output is not really the best, he circles too much and he just doesn't really do barely anything when he gets pushed against the cage. I just did not really see enough offense and enough kind of stand-up in that fight from Lee to see where he's going to be able to hurt Bilder here, because I think these guys are kind of somewhat similar in terms of how they fight. But from my eye test and what I can tell, Bilder's skills are a little bit better here everywhere. I think he's a little bit of a better striker. I think he's definitely probably a better grappler. And I think he's got more power. I think he's probably a little more durable, although I do like Lee's durability. I'm just not really seeing anything in this tape from Lee to make me think that he should be the favorite here. He's, got a lot of fights on Road to UFC. The last like 6 or 8 fights of his record are all Road to UFC guys. And to his credit, most of them were undefeated prospects. But these are kind of Asian undefeated prospect guys. And everybody that has been watching UFC and MMA for a long time knows that the MMA scene in the East, in Asian countries, is not as strong as it is in the West. And that's not anything against them or their martial arts programs. They do have well built out martial arts programs, but you just don't see the same level of prospects coming out of Asia that you do coming out of the West. That's why you see guys like Tatsuro Taira that are coming into the UFC and actually looking amazing. It's standing out. I mean, it's saying something about them, whereas a lot of these guys that look amazing in Asian countries on the regional scenes, like Anshul Jubilee, for example, they end up getting in the UFC and they just can't hang with these guys that are sometimes training out of way better gyms, have way better sparring partners, and just have way better access to training and technology and everything than some of these guys do. So I don't rate his wins against these road to UFC guys super highly, because a lot of these dudes are very, very green. And I mean, these guys were supposed to be the best of the Asian prospects, and a lot of them just did not look like they would cut it in the UFC at all. So I don't think that a lot of his competition against those road to UFC fighters is going to help him a ton in the UFC against these high-level guys like Blake Bilder. And Blake Bilder supposedly has an incredibly long amateur career where I think I heard JeongYeong say he went like 30-2 in the amateurs. He does not have any kind of record of a lot of those, at least an amateur record. He does have amateur fights on Tapology, but not that many. He was undefeated until he fought Kyle Nelson. And he was also a Golden Gloves boxing champ, apparently, although I did not watch any of his Golden Gloves footage or anything like that, so I don't really know how good his pure boxing is. In the UFC, his striking looks pretty wide and pretty low volume, so I am surprised to hear that he is somewhat of a credentialed boxer, because he seems to me almost more like a grappler. But I just think he's got all the tools to win this fight. I don't see where Lee is going to make up the difference to beat Blake Bilder, because Blake Bilder does have weaknesses that can be exploited by high output, crafty strikers and people with good pressure. But Blake is kind of good at dealing with pressure, and I just don't see anything on the feet from Lee that is going to lead me to believe that he's going to be able to move forward and put together like a really good jab or anything and outdo Blake Bilder on the feet. And I think if this goes to the ground, based on what I have seen, I just don't think that Lee is going to be able to like submit Bilder or anything like that. If anything, I think Bilder is more likely to submit Lee. I don't see Bilder knocking him out, although I do think Bilder will have more power. So I just think we're looking at two guys that are honestly, they're not the best of the best in the UFC. But I see one guy in Blake Bilder who seems to have he seems to be cut out for MMA more than what I'm seeing from Lee. And although Lee has a good record and everything like that, I just think he's not going to be able to overcome Blake Bilder here. I think Blake Bilder is too solid of an athlete and too game and too skilled overall in basically the same areas that Lee is, but a little bit better, a little bit more UFC experience. So I'm really, really surprised to see Blake Bilder as the underdog here, especially with all the hype that was on him before his loss to Kyle Nelson. And it's not like Kyle Nelson like destroyed him or anything. Kyle Nelson just seemed to be about a step ahead of him on the feet. And I mean, the fight still went to decision, and Blake Bilder had kind of a really bad round 3. He kind of started to do a bunch of stupid like spinning stuff. So he himself doesn't have like a lot of finishing upside, and he doesn't have a ton of cardio, but I just don't see why anybody would be picking Lee as a favorite over him here, because Lee's strength of schedule just isn't the same, isn't as good. And he hasn't really had tons of success in the UFC or anything like that in the actual big leagues to make me think he should be a favorite here. So I am quite surprised to see that Bilder's the underdog, and I probably will be taking a 1-unit shot on Blake Bilder here, even though, ironically, I literally went into this taping it looking for reasons to fade Bilder, assuming he would be the favorite. But given that he's not, and given that I think it's a pretty good matchup for him, I probably will take a 1-unit shot on him here. So that's the pick, guys. Blake Bilder. Keep it locked in. More picks coming this week.